Firaxis aren't mucking around with their release of Civilization 7 patch updates, so I'm not going to delay this video of two parts. Part 1 is today's just released Civ 7 patch. This time around largely focused on the UI, with some gameplay fixes thrown in there as well. It was smaller than the last update, but also the third Fix-It update in a week, if you're playing on Steam. I'll show you what I can in-game, as well as, of course, referring to the patch notes. The most notable change for me was buried almost right at the bottom of the patch notes, the final improvement that they've made to the UI. They've added building icons to the plot tooltip with their status. The status of a building, what it is. They've also added wonder icons with the wonder's gameplay effect. And finally, to add to this point, resource icons are larger on improved tiles and smaller on unimproved tiles. This is immediately obvious. It actually means you can kind of play with yields on without it being totally overwhelming. And of course, it also acts as a visual cue. You can tell which tiles I've improved and which ones I haven't, which are being worked by populations and farms or fields, mines, or civic buildings, and which ones I'm yet to properly activate. At the end of the point, they thank Sukratact, who had, I believe, already made a UI mod for Civ 7, despite official proper support not really even being out there. I don't believe the proper official tools are even out there yet. Shout out to that man. I couldn't play Civilization 6 without multiple mods from that dude. Firaxis, honestly, just need to give you a job at this point. If we zoom out and take a look at the overall changes that they've made to this, again, short but significant Civ 7 patch, to the UI, the other one that I've noted here is that they've added a notification when an enemy attacks your unit within single player. Notification, of course, comes up on the right-hand side of the screen with all the rest of them. There's a little audio cue. This is great. Little quality of life improvements. Speaking of improvements, near the top of the UI patch notes, you see that they've improved font scaling on the tech tree, image and font alignment on the city details menu, and the overall look and feel of the war declaration screen. These improvements, alongside some of the many others that I haven't highlighted here, are relatively small, or they impact a relatively small number of people. Honestly, right down to tiny things like the escape key can now actually be used to back out of an independent power screen. We're talking really minor details, as well as, like that first UI point, actually quite noticeable and practical improvements to the UI. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, again, these are just small changes. The third patch in a week, though, I mean, credit where credit's due. Let's carry on. While the AI didn't receive many improvements, in fact, none this time around, gameplay did. Most of them, however, are fixes. Fixes to specialists being removed from settlements, to not receiving your 300 gold that you should have got when you played as Isabella and found a natural wonder, as well as some issues around factories, sea trade, and rail connections, sometimes failing or being unavailable. It's all been fixed. At the very top headlining gameplay fix is to do with our favorite nuclear weapons that can now be deployed not just by the aircraft carrier like I was using on that previous live stream, but also by bombers. Bombers can now deploy nuclear weapons when packed into an aerodrome, carrier, or squadron commander. Previously, only heavy bombers could do that, so now multiple airplanes can deploy those bombs. And that brings us to basically the end of part 1. If it weren't for those significant, and I should note very quick improvements to the UI, I probably wouldn't have even made this patch into a video. But I think that those matter. It also, of course, maybe speaks to the future direction. What can we expect from Civ 7 over, let's say, the next 6 months? And what will it look like in a year's time? I'm optimistic it will be in a much better state, and the overall improvement will be much more noticeable than perhaps some of the other games covered on this channel. Oh, it's cold in the shade though, so let's move on to part 2. Unfortunately, perhaps for many a slightly darker part to this video. It's the give you the good news first, here's the bad news, maybe. But also quite an interesting piece. Let's take a look at the DLC. Much of the information here may not be brand new to you, nor was it freshly revealed today. However, it has been slowly coming out, drip-fed to us. And now that the game has properly released, Civ 7 is out in the wild, not just for those of us who paid the FOMO tax, but actually across the board, it's now become much clearer both how much the DLC will cost and specifically what is included, at least within the first overall, if we generously call it a pack, the Crossroads pack. With the game's full release, DLC details are now all over Steam, separate versions with an optional extra at every step to purchase the next one. The prices here, of course, are in New Zealand dollars, US dollars, just a little bit under half, so 100 is probably about 60 US dollars, 50 or 60 US dollars, just for context there that probably a lot more of you will understand. On the topic of DLC information, we also see what I believe is probably just the most plain English, easy to follow write-up of what the Founders Edition, Deluxe Edition also actually includes, and how long it will be available for, and that's thanks to the updates that have taken place on Steam. It's perhaps the Crossroads of the World collection that is the most interesting, and despite it not having came out yet, or not really, it's a little bit confusing, isn't it, with that release date? As you can see, initial reviews, not so hot. And it would appear as though the DLC priced by itself comes in at around 30 US dollars. Again, regional pricing may and often does vary fairly heavily. It's when we turn our eyes to the description of the Crossroads of the World collection that I am particularly interested. You see, on the Steam page, it's literally referred to as a season pass, not to harp up an old conversation that I've been ringing the bell on for months and months, but this does feel a lot like a season pass in disguise, and now it appears part of that disguise has simply fallen away. Important to note, of course, not everything here is crystal clear and accurate. We know that the DLC won't be coming between January and March because January's already happened and it's been announced to release in March. We do, of course, see a breakdown of every single thing that will be included. This is not news to you if you've watched some of my videos before, but just as a gentle reminder, we're receiving Ada Lovelace as well as Great Britain. We're also receiving Carthage as the second playable Civ. Down the road in the second part, Simon Bolivar, a playable leader, as well as 2 more civilizations, Bulgaria and Nepal. And that rounds out the overall DLC alongside 4 natural wonders. And obviously that rounds out basically the substantial element of the DLC. You've probably heard my views on it before, so I don't need to repeat them here. Feels bad to have Great Britain as a DLC release just 1 month after the game's release. In principle, though, I have nothing against them adding extra content, particularly extra playable civilizations and leaders as the years move on. One final note to try and sort of bring this all together and look forward to the future just a little bit. At the start of the patch, before the patch notes begin, the mention of stability improvements and fixes, by the way, is right up the top here with this. They say that they are actively working on a development roadmap outlining the major updates to the game, so we are still waiting on that roadmap. We've seen the DLC one, but we haven't seen the free update one. They say it'll include things like UI improvements and improvements to other quote-unquote critical areas, and it's their goal to share it in the coming weeks. They appreciate the patience and, of course, are actively looking for feedback, and many of the changes, it would seem, are related to our feedback. Now, speaking of feedback, I've got a guide video to get back to making based on your feedback and comments. It's been a whirlwind of a week, and there's more to come. See you next time.